Have you ever noticed that just when things start going right in your life, you do something incredibly stupid? You ghost the person who finally treats you well. You skip the gym after losing 10 pounds. You start showing up late to the job you once prayed for. And the worst part, you know you're doing it, but you can't stop. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're just addicted to what hurts. This isn't about laziness. It's not about a lack of willpower. It's about something far darker and far more human. We sabotage our success because, deep down, we don't believe we deserve it. Or worse, because the pain has become our home. This video is not about motivation. It's about deprogramming the sabotage machine inside you. Over the next 5 chapters, we're going to dive into the darkest corners of your psychology and expose the invisible mechanisms that make you destroy what you spent years building. We'll talk about why you feel anxious when things go well, why peace feels unnatural, why failure feels comfortable, and why happiness makes you panic. We'll trace the roots of sabotage through trauma, childhood programming, fear of identity collapse, and even neurochemical addiction to stress. We'll quote Carl Jung, Viktor Frankl, Freud, Bessel van der Kolk, and others who dared to look inside the human psyche. And we'll end by showing what modern science says about how to stop this cycle for good. By the end, you'll no longer be confused about why you keep pulling the trigger on your own joy, because this time you might finally let yourself win. You finally made it, so why are you ruining everything? There's something deeply disturbing about getting what you've always this promotion you procrastinate not, because then somewhere inside you, it is one of the most tragic paradoxes of the human being. A man that spends 10 years building his business, of a woman finally finds someone. This cannot be real. You don't deserve this. Children raised with conditional love become adults, and what we do when we feel we are right. This is not stupidity. That's trauma playing chess with your future. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of yourself that you have buried. The self that you reject. This is the cruelest part no one ever talks about, but today we're going to talk about. We're going to rip off the mask of Dubby, because if you don't face it now, you'll lose everything beautiful that tries to stay in your life, not because you had to, but because your mind didn't let you believe it could. The moment you get up, you pull yourself back. The trap of the family stuff. There's a strange kind of loyalty that people carry, not to their dreams, but to their own. A man makes more money than he ever thought possible and begins to spend it recklessly until Hugh liked to call it me. This is the first and cruelest law of self-sabotage. Success is an interruption. It challenges the script you were given as he is gay. Each of us has an internal thermostat setting that determines how much love, success, and creativity we allow ourselves to enjoy. Gay Hendrand, when life dares to exceed this scenario, you unconsciously sabotage to restore emotional bullet. This is where Freud's concept of the repetition compulsion comes in. The drive to recreate the emotional environment of early life. Even if it's destructive, what we cannot remember, we are doomed to repeat. Sigmund, so you repeat the chaos, not because you want to, but because part of you believes it is. I think of it as a psychological gravity pulling you down. The moment you are, that's why so many people are addicted, because going up is not just about growth. It's better. Carl Jung, a visa. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own, so we invented problems. No one talks about the pain that comes. You're not failing because you're until you see this. You'll keep circling the same fire, calling it F, but it's not a fan, and unless you choose to stop it, it will quietly ruin everything good that dares to remain in your life. The inner critic that never left. Childhood wounds and internalized failure. Some people are not haunted by ghosts. They are haunted by voices. Voices that sound like their own. You're not enough. You'll ruin it like you always do. Don't get too happy. It never lasts. These are not delusions. They are echoes, old judgments, internalized in childhood, now masquerading as logic. We call it low self-esteem, but that phrase is too gentle. This is structural damage to the foundation of identity. And it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from someone. The child who was only loved when they excelled becomes the adult who panics when life is calm. The boy who was never allowed to cry becomes the man who explodes in rage. The girl who was told she was too much now apologizes for simply existing. Alice Miller wrote about this with surgical clarity in The Drama of the Gifted Child. The child cannot experience rage against the person on whom his life depends, so he represses it, and what remains is self-contempt. This is the origin of the inner critic, not a flaw, not a sign, a defense mechanism. When you're young, your survival depends on others. So if they hurt you, neglect you, invalidate you, you don't blame them. You blame yourself. You'd rather believe you're broken than believe the people you depend on are incapable of loving you. That self-blame becomes your truth. And later, when you start to win in life, it doesn't match the script. So you sabotage, not because you don't want to succeed, because success threatens the identity you use to stay emotionally alive. Freud called this a repetition compulsion. We are what we are because we have been what we have been. From Beyond the Pleasure principle, we repeat the pain, not because we enjoy it, but because it is ours. We recreate the feeling of not being good enough because, for many, that's the first emotional language they ever learned. Think about the child who brings home a perfect test, and hears, "¿Por qué no?" saying invasion of 28. That child grows up to be an adult who hears praise as pressure, affection as danger, success as a countdown to shame. So when they start to succeed, they pull because deep down, something inside whispers, if you keep going, they'll see you. And if they see you, they'll leave. This is not drama. This is developmental psychology. And here's the saddest part. Most people don't even realize they're not living their own life. They're still obeying voices from decades ago. That's why when people get therapy, they don't just cry over new wounds. They weep for the child who never got to exist freely. They mourn the years spent living as a performance for others. You don't sabotage because you're lazy. You sabotage because part of you still believes love must be earned through suffering. You sabotage because peace feels like you're violating a contract. You signed as a child a contract written in silence and sealed with fear. Until you rewrite that contract, you will unconsciously return to the only love you were ever taught, conditional, anxious, and earned through pain. The addiction to chaos, when peace feels like emptiness as the moment life becomes calm. They pick a fight. With second, a relationship feels safe. They provoke drama. When the silence gets too loud, they self-destruct. Not because they want to ruin everything, but because deep peace feels like death to someone raised in emotional war. This isn't rebellion. This is wiring. But Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, explains it clearly. Dream if your nervous system was shaped by unpredictability, abandonment, yelling, silence, or fear, then your baseline becomes You don't feel alive unless something is on fire. You crave adrenaline, confrontation, impulsive decisions because your inner world is addicted to stimulation. This is not a metaphor, it's chemistry. Its studies have shown that trauma survivors often become biologically dependent on cortisol and adrenaline, the same stress hormones that flood the body in crisis. So even when life slows down, the brain feels deprived. It panics, it creates problems to restore chemical balance, a peaceful life to them. Flat, lifeless, suspicious. What's wrong with me? Things are going too well. They don't trust. Joy they can't sit in comfort without shaking, and so they unconsciously inject just enough chaos to make the world feel normal again. Take the woman who finds a partner who listens, supports, and stays. After a few months, she starts arguments over trivial things. She accuses, withdraws, feels suffocated. Not because she doesn't love him, but because part of her still believes love must hurt. Take the man who finally gets promoted. Instead of celebrating, he misses deadlines, shows up late, takes reckless risks. Why? Because his internal blueprint equates struggle with worth, and without it, he feels lost. This is emotional homeostasis, the tendency of the mind to restore what's familiar, even if it's harmful. Nietzsche once wrote, "Man is more often afraid of the truth than of death." And one of the deepest truths is this: some people will destroy a good thing because it doesn't match the suffering they've always known. It's not just psychological, it's philosophical. Peace threatens the ego you built to survive. Chaos, in contrast, keeps the ego busy, always fighting, proving, defending. But peace says, now what? And in that question, the illusion of identity starts to dissolve. That's why people flee from silence, because in silence, you're forced to meet the self you've spent years avoiding. So when people say they're bored, often what they mean is, I'm finally safe, and I don't know how to be here. But if you don't learn to sit in that discomfort, you will keep inviting storms into your life, not because they're needed, but because they feel like home. And no amount of external success can save someone who only feels alive when their world